Hello, everyone, and welcome to NetApp On Air. As always, I'm your host, Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us today. Very excited about today's show. We're winding down the year. We're past Insight. We've got reInvent to look forward to. Microsoft Ignite is going on. All kinds of good stuff to wrap up the year here. And we're not done. We've got a great guest today to talk about something that's very near and dear to me. If any of you guys know me and my history, I'm tied at the hip to virtualization, specifically around VMware and some of the other hypervisors out there. We're going to be talking virtualization today, and a lot of stuff to go over. We got new ONTAP tools to talk about. We got the latest versions of ONTAP. We got new hardware to talk about. We got new cloud integrations to talk about. VMware Barcelona, VMware Explore Barcelona. It's a mouthful. Just wrapped up as well, so we've got some announcements to go over that came out of that to discuss. Big show today to talk about. So strap in, grab a drink. Let's go. Let's talk about all this stuff. Before we do, make sure you get into our Discord community. Most of you guys are there at this point. Thank you for joining us. But if you're not in there yet, that is the place to be. There's over 5,000 members in the community there. You've got a ton of NetApp support staff, myself, and our community manager, Drew Claybrook, as well as some of our executives. Our product leadership hangs out in there. Our support team hangs out in there. So it is the place to get some direct answers and interact with your peers that are also dealing with these day-to-day problems at a technical level. So come join us, netappdiscord.com or discord.gg/NetApp. I think that's all I really wanted to talk about or promote, but I wanted to set this up a little bit. Earlier this year, there were some decisions made by Broadcom in the way that they were going to affect things with VMware. We had Rich Teslo from the Two Guys Tech YouTube channel on earlier this year. I believe it was back in April or May. So if you've missed that one, go back and watch his. He's continued to make content. So we love Rich. Thank you so much for making the content that you do, and please keep doing it. We're going to talk today about not only the new stuff, but in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about some of the alternatives that are out there that you can consider if you're feeling up against the wall with VMware, and how NetApp can help you either optimize those costs around your VMware installation or help you migrate to make some of your workloads to alternatives. So this is going to be a big one, folks. Hang tight. And I brought somebody who, the best person I could find at NetApp to talk about this stuff. He's been on the show before. You guys know who he is. He hangs out in Discord with us. Mr. Chance Bingen. Chance, thank you so much for joining the show again.
Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where you're at.
It sounds like you're just coming off of VM. I keep saying VMworld. It's going to kick in one of these days, guys.
One of these days. Yep.
VMware Explore Barcelona.
Yes. Yeah. So it was a fantastic experience. I think VMware did a really good job of delivering the event in Barcelona. Most of their new groundbreaking stuff is released in Las Vegas every year. Which comes before Barcelona typically, or the EMEA VMware Explore, as it were. And so they didn't have a ton of new announcements there, but they did have some interesting new licensing options to talk about, changes to what's included in the bundles. So, we can dive into that stuff. But yeah, I know it's funny you mentioned, how you've been tied at the hip to virtualization. So for those who don't know, I am doing what Nick did in a prior life. So
10 years
I'm
ago, 12
Nick,
years
Nick
ago.
Jr., maybe I'll be Nick when I grow up one day.
Nick 2.0. When you get, so 10 years from now, you have to grow a beard and host a podcast.
Okay. That's a challenge.
Gauntlet thrown down. No, I love chatting with you because yes, it does. It hits me in the feels in a certain way because it's how I came up through the late 2000s as a customer, and how I ended up ultimately finding my way to NetApp was because I was a VMware admin in a very large public healthcare. We had over 1,000 servers that got virtualized. That was the story of 2007 to 2010, Nick. I P2V'd 1,000 servers and consolidated everything on NetApp storage and then joined NetApp. A lot of people don't know that about Nick. Yeah. So that's my journey. And then I spent the next 5 years writing all of the documentation on how to do those kinds of things. The big TR 4790, I don't even remember the number at this point. Whatever the big vSphere best practices with my entire team, Chris Gebhardt, Pete Learmonth, Julian Cates. Who am I missing? Jack McLeod. A lot of folks contributed to that monolithic piece of best practices architecture. So
Yeah.
A lot of
One of
good
those
stuff.
guys is like 10 feet from me right now, by the way. So
Which one is that?
Gebs.
Chris? Gebs,
Yeah,
yeah.
Chris.
Shout out to Gebs and the entire TME team over there, making all of the auxiliary stuff outside of core ONTAP that you guys know, all the flex and snap words that we're going to be covering more here on air, and we're going to be bringing a lot of his team on to be talking about that. We've met Tony Ansley doing Snap Mirror. Artie came in from the field to give us a Snap Center demo recently, and now we've got you coming on. You're not on Gebs' team, but you're on my team now because they've consolidated things. We're
all one big happy family.
We're one big happy family. Anyway, we're here today to talk about
we're on
VMware, and then, like I said at the beginning, virtualization in the second half. I wanted to bring you on because now that we're past Barcelona, we need to kind of give an update, and we've got ONTAP 9.16 out there officially. We had Keith on last week, or during the launch week, to do an update, a full deep dive on 9.16 and what's new. I also wanted to kind of meet up with you, and this was very kind of intentional about where it was. Following on from the hardware announcements and the ONTAP updates and everything like that, where do we stand with ONTAP tools? And were there any big updates there? So I'm going to throw your slides up here on, and we'll just kind of give everybody the quick guided tour of like what's going on with ONTAP tools for vSphere.
Yeah, so to kind of set the stage for what we're doing with ONTAP Tools 10.3, which, by the way, you'll notice the versioning has changed, right? Because this year we released something we've been, the new ONTAP Tools we've been working on for a couple of years now, actually. And it has kind of evolved out of a project we were working on with some design partners, some customers, service providers that were looking for a better way to do ONTAP tools. And at the same time, we kind of realized that the product had to evolve to meet the needs of the modern data center. And at the time, we were talking to VMware about Cloud Foundation and going forward. So it was really designed from the ground up to be a perfect fit for VMware Cloud Foundation. So before I deep dive into that, I was going to set the stage for some of the things we're doing with some of the new features in ONTAP that are going to be supported by ONTAP tools. Because the primary thing that ONTAP tools does for you is it takes all the rich, the data management goodness of ONTAP and brings it into vCenter. So if you're familiar with managing vSAN, or, a lot of people just love having that ability to self-manage storage right in the vCenter interface. And or if you're using ARIA or VCF operations or VCF automation, now you can take all the things that ONTAP tools can do is now extensible by using REST APIs. So you can actually take all these simple data store provisioning wizards and all, not just provisioning, but complete lifecycle management of storage, and manage that through VCF automation. So there's a ton of stuff we're doing there too.
Yeah, when did just a quick thing real quick, like this is not something new that NetApp has just started or launched recently. Like it's one of the reasons I fell in love with ONTAP or with NetApp when I was a customer in the late 2000s. It was originally called the Virtual Storage Console, and it didn't have backups and it didn't have anything like that built into it. It was simply just apply the best practices settings to my hosts and right-click mount a volume, which would go to talk to ONTAP, create a new volume, mount the data store over NFS or iSCSI, or Fiber Channel if we had it configured. All of that worked in the late 2000s. Like this has been around. This has been vetted and baked and boiled and re-engineered. And so when did it change from VSC to OTV? Do you remember that sort of timeline?
Yeah, and it's funny to your point about what it would do in the old days. It still does today, the same kind of stuff with more logic, more advanced logic and stuff built in. But things like making sure when it creates the export policy that it sets it up so that things like VAI will actually work, right? Because a lot of people don't know that for VAI to work, your export policy has to support NFS v4 RPC calls. And if you don't have that in the export policy, it's not going to work. So I remember back when I was in support, we would always get calls coming in where somebody just missed one little step in the export policy and things weren't doing what they wanted it to do. And even things like creating LUNs before UNMAP or space reclamation, inline space reclamation was supported by default. starting in 9.15.1. Before that, you had to set an option, and it was really not obvious. It wasn't even that option wasn't even in System Manager. So if you were in System Manager, you wouldn't even see the option.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of like misconfigured LUNs and things like that. And if you used ONTAP Tools, or back in those days, it was VSC, it would just do everything for you correctly the first time and make sure all the features you wanted were pre-configured, right? So that you could take advantage of as much of that integration as possible. But to your question, yeah, I mean, that goes back like 17 years or 18 years, something like that,
Yeah, it was the
when it
time when
started live. Yeah.
so some of the work that some of the first work that I did when I joined NetApp was the tying together of Snap Manager for Virtual Infrastructure, SMVI,
Hmm.
and building that into the virtual storage console where you had it built into vCenter. And I would argue that like that's one of the biggest things that made VMware as popular as they did was the kind of third party
Oh, yeah.
what's the word, extensibility of Virtual
Hmm.
Center or vCenter. So
Yeah.
that's what made them so big, because it allowed vendors like us to come in and like deliver our goods and services directly into a native platform like that. And we've
Yeah.
seen that world of platform engineering just take off, that platform integration just take off over the last 20 years at this point.
Yeah,
Just to where
totally.
it
I
is today.
mean, absolutely. One of the big differentiators when you look across the marketplace for virtualization solutions, right? Whether you're looking at, Red Hat OpenShift virtualization or Microsoft Hyper-V or SUSE Rancher with Harvester or KVM, Oracle virtualization, all these other things. The one thing that VMware did very early on and did very well was build out this rich, this robust ecosystem of partner integrations that I don't think anybody else has really quite caught up to yet.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about those alternatives afterwards. I apologize for squirreling for side questing there. Um, Back to where we were.
Yeah.
We've launched new hardware. We've got new ONTAP.
Mhm.
What are some of the implications there when it comes to VMware and virtualization?
Right. So earlier this year, we launched the new unified A1K 90 A70, and throughout the years, most of the years that I've been at NetApp, for the most part, every time we iterate a new generation of hardware, it's usually bigger, faster, stronger, faster ports, faster processor, more memory for read-ahead cache. But it's usually that kind of iteration. So one of the things that makes this generation, this and then the C series as well that we just announced, um, is the addition of the Intel QAT2 offload technology, which allows us to offload our storage efficiency to the QAT2 card or chips. And that allows us, but by taking compression out of the kind of IO path, as it were, and that allows us to then go up to like a 32K compression unit size, right? So we're getting
Yeah.
much more storage efficiency. And that was one of the things that VMware really, when we were able to develop deduplication all those years ago, and bring that to market, the idea that you could deploy two Windows VMs, not just consolidate your compute, but also consolidate storage by having, essentially, back in those days, we called it ASIS, which was advanced single instance storage. You remember that from back
Yep.
in the day. And so that was just incredible. And now we're able to take that and make it just significantly more performant, not just performant in terms of IO, but the actual amount of data we're able to compress and save is much better than it used to be. Now, we kind of fast forward, we've been doing a lot of stuff with block storage. And so also, historically, when we've been releasing the new ASA systems, we originally released the ASA several years ago, relaunched it again last year with the new family, and this year we're relaunching it again. But this is yet another milestone going forward to where NetApp is going long term. And let me double click on that for a second. Not only do you get all the goodies that you get from the QAT2 offloads, but for anyone who's watching who didn't sign up for Insight and watch the day 3 keynote, I really strongly encourage you to go back and watch the recording of the day 3 keynote. Krish went through and presented the vision of where ONTAP is going. our storage operating system. And that vision kind of moves in a sort of in a disaggregated fashion. So what you see a lot of times with ONTAP clusters is when you're pushing a lot of I/O, you may actually run out of port or CPU before you run out of disk. You know, in the old days when we were doing this, whenever a performance issue would come up, you'd look at the controller stats, and it was always the spinning disk was always the bottleneck, right?
Yeah.
And now the NVMe disk. So these are all complete end-to-end NVMe solutions now, and the disks are never the bottleneck anymore. So now you need to kind of asymmetrically scale your ONTAP cluster to add more compute, and that's kind of the vision that he's going with. What he talked about there. So if you haven't seen it, go watch Day 3 Keynote Insight 2024.
Yeah, it's
but
right here on the YouTube channel. Just look for the Insight 2024 full playlist, I think is what it's called. I forget what we named it up, but I think I even broke Krish's segment. It was so important, I broke it out as a separate video. It's here on the channel if you guys want to find it. Drew, if you can find it and throw it in the chat, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, please do. That would be awesome. Super helpful for the audience. So where this ties into that is this is the first step on the journey towards that, right? So with ASAs traditionally, even though these were all SAN, all block symmetric arrays, you still had an aggregate and then a FlexVol on an aggregate, right? So you had RAID on the disks and an aggregate file system on RAID, and then a FlexVol on top of that, and then a LUN or a namespace inside of that volume. So with the new ASA platform, that completely shifts that paradigm. So now instead of disks being owned by a node, the disks are owned by an abstract concept, right? So you can start thinking of an HA pair in this first iteration of that journey towards what Krish was talking about as being, like semi-disaggregated, right? And the first step in this multi-step journey, both nodes of an HA pair kind of co-own these disks, right? And so there's no more concept of having to manage an aggregate or a FlexVol. All the LUN and namespace placement is all managed automatically. You never have to worry about any of that stuff really ever again on the ASA platforms.
So how does that apply to a VMware solution, for example? How does all of that? Why does that matter to VMware admins?
So not only is it a simpler way of managing storage just in general, but now integrating that through ONTAP Tools, we're able to take and even simplify it further. So historically, it's, with ONTAP Tools made it so easy to manage storage. Like you said earlier, you could like right click on, a 32 node or whatever ESXi cluster, launch like a 3 or 4 or 5 page wizard, depending on what options you chose, and just next, give you some size, tell it what kind of data store you want, next, finish. And it would go out and automate the creation of all those things. For SAN, it would be an iGroup or a subsystem in addition to the volume, namespace, all that. But some of those things were things that we let you choose in the wizard, right? So which SVM do you want? And then which aggregate do you want? And, do you want to define a volume? Do you want it to automatically create a volume? These are all things that let you do. Now it takes and just gives you the whole capacity of the cluster to use as, however your particular business requirements, need. So now, and as we move forward and do things like vVols, this is where it starts to get incredibly powerful, because now, a vVol isn't going to be tied to, packaged together with a bunch of other vVols on a FlexVol. We're going to be able to do much more granular management and do things. There's some stuff I can't necessarily talk about today, but that allows us to really take advantage of the full power and potential of both what vVols has to offer and the intelligent data infrastructure. So just use your imagination and bring all those things together. But for example, being able to, not have to create a bunch of FlexVols and assign those as backing capacity to a vVol data store. Now you just have a vVol container that is, representing the capacity of the whole cluster, or the HA pair, as it were, depending on, how big your setup is. So,
and some of the auto balancing that can happen, whether it's through SVM migrate or whatever, like you can set up policies to determine on the back end, like what load is going to go to certain places. It's almost like, if you're a VMware admin, it's almost like DRS in a way. Like you can sort of dial in where you want your VMs to dance across your various hosts that you have in your vCenter architecture. But maybe not that automatic, but you're going to see a level of load balancing just in a different way across your entire cluster, assuming you have multiple nodes of different arrays and different storage systems. You may have all of your workloads on an ASA that's in a cluster with maybe a FAS system or an AFF, C-series, for example, and you may want to use that for protection or secondary or whatever kind of storage, but it's all going to live and exist together in the same cluster behind it. What Chance is referring to here basically is it's all going to be one visible piece of storage infrastructure to VMware. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be super cool, and they are extremely fast too. So
no kidding.
We can mention that as well.
Storage systems I've ever come across from a performance standpoint. It's all PCIe Gen 5. Like you mentioned with QAT, we are now offloading to in kind of compression and storage efficiencies to a set off the CPU, and like or segmented portion of the CPU specifically made for it. Kind of how Intel does quick sync with encoding and things like that. It's just another piece of technology that Intel's natively building into the CPUs. But if you want to look up QAT, it's an Intel technology and dig more into that. It's a big part of this new generation of systems across the board.
Yep, very true. So expanding onto that, a lot of the things we're doing with ONTAP are in partnership with VMware. So we're some of these things are being co-developed, co-engineered. Where we have regular engineering interlocks. We're opening bugs with them. They're opening bugs with us as we're developing these technologies. One of the big things that we announced earlier this year was the SnapMirror Active Sync Symmetric Access. Now this is integrated into ONTAP Tools starting in the 10.2 release, which is generally available now.
Yeah.
It is the current generally available release. And how this makes it simple to implement. So you may have heard the term vSphere Metro Storage Cluster before. What a lot of people kind of misunderstand, that they think that's a product or a SKU you can purchase from VMware or NetApp or something like that. It's really more of a design methodology or a solution architecture, if you will. So what ONTAP Tools has done is they've created the easy button for VMSC. What you can do now is you can right click on a host cluster, and there's a new wizard that sits there right next to provision, data store, and all the other things you can do called Protect Cluster. So now you can click that Protect Cluster wizard and launch, against like 3, 4, whatever pages, and it will automatically you can pick where you're going from and where you're going to, and it will basically automatically configure SnapMirror Active Sync for every single one of the data stores on that cluster. And you hit finish, and essentially what you've done at the end of that wizard is you have deployed a vSphere Metro storage cluster in just a few easy steps, like super, super easy. Some of the things
is that across 2 separate storage systems, 2 separate clusters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So the idea is you have a LUN that is stretched across 2 ONTAP clusters, and then you have a single vSphere cluster that is stretched across sites. And one of the cool things about what we're doing with SnapMirror Active Sync, and this is actually exposed in the OTV wizard, is you have the ability to define what we call host proximity. So you can say hosts in site A are closer to the storage in site A. And so in band through the protocol, we can kind of advertise that. And so the hosts will know, hey, even in a uniform configuration where every host can see every path on every cluster node, right? Even in a configuration like that, they will know in band through the protocol where they should be sending their IO to avoid that WAN traffic, so that you can optimize the performance on both sides of the fabric, so to say, and it could be iSCSI or Fiber Channel today. And we're looking at adding more protocols in the future to that.
Yeah, and it's almost like building some affinity rules into where your VMs live on certain hosts based on proximity to the storage. I really like that.
Yeah, it's like IO affinity. I like that. It's a good idea.
All right, I'm going to ask you a hot take question.
Yep.
Is NVMe over TCP going to kill iSCSI? Yes or no?
In the long run, yes.
Yeah. It kind of rules it irrelevant, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I will say is, as soon as you have holistic support for it across your ecosystem, meaning your backup vendor supports it, could be Snap Center, we support it now.
Yeah.
ONTAP Tools, your array. Once we add that, in the future, I hope we add that to SnapMirror ActiveSync. Once you have the entire solution wrapped around that, to me, there's no need for iSCSI anymore.
Yeah.
I met with a customer yesterday. So one of the advantages that we always talk about with NVMe is not only do you never have to worry about queue management anymore, making sure you have enough devices with enough queue slots and all that kind of stuff. That's a thing of the past with NVMe.
Yeah.
Not
no more
only
MPIO, no more WWPNs for fiber channel. Like it's so good, guys. Like if you haven't jumped on the NVMe over TCP train yet, you got to try it.
Mm-hmm. And so the other thing too that a lot of people don't necessarily think of right away when they think of NVMe is in vSphere, in particular 802 and later, but just in all releases of vSphere, but in particular starting with 802, it gets even better, is that your CPU utilization for storage work on the compute side, and on the storage side as well, but definitely on the compute side, is going to run around half, like 50, anywhere from, let's say 40 to 60% less CPU consumption for storage IO, which is big in a world where every core you're licensing from Broadcom matters in real dollars. So that's definitely, a big reason. So I met with a customer yesterday, and that was the top reason why they were going to NVMe. Like they had enough performance, but they were trying to cut down CPU utilization as much as possible.
Yeah. People don't think about that. Like there's offload cards now that do that kind of stuff too. And like there's all kinds of ways that you can improve the efficiencies of Ethernet. And I gotta highlight it as a NAS, as a hashtag NAS for life guy myself, Thomas. Thank you for the comment. I came up on NFS myself. I did a lot of fiber channel Clarion and Symmetrics work in the early days. Data General, not before the evil 3-letter company bought them. But it was all fiber channel, and I swam in WWPNs and interconnect switches, and it was just not fun. It drove me into the loving arms of NAS and NFS, especially when 10 gig came out. Now that we've got 400 and even we're talking 800 gig Ethernet, you can have all of the performance characteristics of block with the efficiencies and ease of management of Ethernet. That is the promise of NVMe over TCP. And instead of working in individual initiators and groups, you're working in namespaces. And so the more you dig into NVMe, it is the peanut butter jelly marriage, best of both worlds between block and NAS, in my opinion. Or block and Ethernet, I should say. But I look at that as like that is the next step. It is the next big protocol. As soon as the cloud providers, I think, really start adopting it en masse, I think I've said this a few times on the show here. As soon as they really take it up, and there's AWS is starting to, we're seeing it happen. Like that's going to be the big needle move, in my opinion, because then you're going to start having like DBAs and workload owners start to push those requirements down into on-prem infrastructure. And the good news is we got you covered. Like you can do all ONTAP supports NVMe. So if you're a NetApp customer, you don't have anything to worry about. Just go tick it on.
Yep.
That's it.
It's all included with ONTAP One. All the protocols, like all the ONTAP features, they're all included with ONTAP One.
Yep.
So you don't even have to worry about it. But for our NAS guys though, we do have some stuff to talk about this year as well. I'll wrap up with NVMe because there are a couple things that we did just announce. So we had support for NVMe on Metro Cluster, the NetApp Metro Cluster MCC. So we had NVMe FC support for that. We just recently added support for NVMe TCP with MCC, supported with VMware, obviously on the front end. But a big thing that was honestly, it was most of our customers were telling us was the big adoption blocker was a lack of NVMe deallocate support. So earlier I mentioned SCSI Unmap and the native space reclamation for iSCSI and FCP, or fiber channel LUNs. We didn't support that until now. So 9.16.1 is the first release of ONTAP that supports the native space reclamation with NVMe. And the reason why that's important, in particular for VMware environments, is you're going to have guest OSs that are deleting files, and they'll end up with lots of dead space inside the VMDKs, or you may even just delete whole VMs, and then you have this dead space in the LUN or namespace in this case, that you're not able to, if you're operating either as a hoster, internal service provider, external service provider, whatever, you need to maximize your storage efficiency or over commitment of that storage as much as possible. But if you've got a bunch of dead space sitting there that is just taking up room, it's not going to help your business any. So now that we have that, the way deallocate works is, and conceptually, it's pretty much the same as the SCSI unmap function, where the host sends a command to the storage array and says, okay, I just deleted these blocks. It's okay for you to go delete those blocks too. So now ONTAP will know, okay, I don't need this block range. I can deallocate it and make it available for other storage consumers. Could be other tenants, it could be other VMs, it could be other ones, whatever. But that's going to give you that ability to use that space that was previously being taken up by just data that was deleted but not reclaimed.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
Let's see, a couple other things. So I will touch on one of the things that was big this year with the release of vSphere 8 Update 2 was the general availability for our NAS guys of NConnect for support for vSphere. Now, it's been supported in ONTAP for years. Obviously, we do a lot of NAS stuff. So we've been supporting NConnect since like 9.8, which is forever ago.
Yeah, like
now
10 years
at
ago.
this point. Something like that, yeah. So there's a whole origin story of how that came to be, which is interesting. We could maybe talk about that later. Maybe if there's an on-air extra or something.
Right.
But what NFS NConnect, and it's supported with both v3 and v4.1, what it allows you to do is establish multiple concurrent TCP connections from your same VM kernel port to your same LIF. So that allows you to maximize your network utilization and reduce latency. And it's basically a free performance upgrade. And you can increase the setting and decrease the setting dynamically on the fly. There's no downtime required to use it. You just, as long as you're running vSphere 8. It was available as a tech preview in 8.0 Update 1. It's generally available in 8.02 and 8.03, added the NFS 4.1 support. But what we're seeing is when you look at aggregated performance with an ONTAP cluster and NFS data stores, when you're running a bunch of VMs with a bunch of I/O, the amount of concurrency you can now drive is giving you basically very close to block level performance with NFS. Not NVMe performance, but iSCSI fiber channel type level performance with equivalent resources.
It was always one of the downfalls of NFS. It was one of the negatives against it. Even though we had enough Ethernet to overpower it, we had enough redundancy in the switch stack and in the bandwidth to sort of overpower it and overcome it. But yeah, it was always a limitation of the number of connections that you could have simultaneously to any given I/O. And I think that's how so with NConnect, it's completely changed the game with that. Am I summarizing that the right way?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a game changer for sure. What you see if you look at the performance charts, I might have one in the stick. I don't remember if I left it in or not. But if you look at the performance charts, and we tested every possible I/O combination you can imagine, but typically what you see is the hockey stick, where the amount of latency you get for an increased amount of I/O, it shifts right. So the more NConnect connections you add, so the value could be anything from 1 to 4 by default, or you can actually raise the maximum as high as 8 through an advanced setting, 1 to 8. And the more you add it, that hockey stick starts to shift right, and it basically leans right up against the hockey stick of iSCSI for, again, equivalent connections, equivalent transport, all that kind of stuff.
So what's
it's
required
really
for people
incredible.
To take advantage of that?
Upgrade to 802 and do it. There's not much else you can do. So I will, one of the things though is this was designed for cloud automation. This wasn't really designed for the average user. So it's not in the vCenter UI yet. that may or may not come in ONTAP Tools at some point. Just saying it might. Um, but if you just Google, so anyway, there's nothing in vCenter where you can just like right click on a data store and say edit and connect setting or something like that. But I wrote a blog post a couple weeks ago now. If you just Google, or maybe Drew can drop it in the comments, a blog post how to manage NConnect at scale with PowerShell. I wrote a PowerShell script that you could, run through, again, ARIA automation, VCF automation, something like that. And it just pops up and asks you, what data center do you want to manage? What do you want the setting to be? Oh, and by the way, if you want, I'll go and enable snapshot offload too, which is another incredibly powerful thing. The only thing to be aware of with snapshot offload, which I'll describe what that is in a second, but is if you're, with logical space reporting, you're going to start seeing the space of the snapshots that are offloaded. So what snapshot offload is a VAI primitive that you can essentially right click on a VM and just do a normal vCenter managed snapshot. Looks, functions to the user. Other than being a whole lot faster, it looks like any other VMware snapshot. But instead of creating a Delta file and then you end up with the IO amplification problem, and the Delta file itself becomes a single point of failure.
Yeah.
Instead of doing all that, all we do is sysclone the file or flexclone the file and then present that through VAI back to vCenter as the snapshot. So there's no longer any kind of performance impact or single point of failure or anything for the snapshot. Now, the one limitation there is because we own the file system and they don't do storage vMotion once you have that. So that VM is kind of stuck there until you delete the snapshots and then you can move it off. So there's kind of pros and cons to everything. We are working with VMware on that, so hopefully we'll see some changes there, but we'll see what time brings us.
Let me jump in here real quick. We got some things in the chat that I wanted to address real quick. OG3
Yeah, definitely
says your script to enable, speaking of, we're talking about NConnect, enable is great. Use it already with customers. Fantastic.
Awesome, man. Thanks. Appreciate it. Or he or she.
Yeah.
No judging.
I'm pretty sure it's a he. Since NFS's v3 is so popular and rock solid, do you actually see a rise of vVol's data stores, or are people just hanging on to that good old NFS v3 at this point, especially with NConnect coming around?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because, traditionally what you see is the value prop of vVols makes more sense in a block environment than it does in a NAS environment, because you already kind of get the simplicity of being able to have like large scale data stores that you don't have to worry about file system capacities in and things like that. Right? A 300 terabyte FlexVol is a pretty big data store, and then you can use a Flex group if you need something bigger than that. Yeah. What I will say is the two things there is quality of service is really only practical with vVols, even with NFS, and then the other thing is the copy offload. So if you use our VAI cloning technology, if you're cloning a VM and its source and destination volume are the same, it's like almost instantaneous. At least the copy part is. And VMware doing its thing takes a few extra seconds. But when you go across these block boundaries, that's when we have to physically copy data from one volume or aggregate or node or whatever to another. So that's when it starts to slow down. With vVols, because it's not limited by that, what's defined by the in-band protocol, we're able to do much more intelligent things. So if you clone an NFS, a VM over an NFS vVols data store, for example, you still get that rapid cloning experience, because what we do is we'll clone the VM, like immediately instantiate the VM, and then we'll do the block copy on the back end, but we'll give you access to the data now, and then we'll pass the reads through while we're doing it on the back end. So
almost like a backfill. We'll do it all on the back end for you.
Yeah. So cloning, and I have customers that their like number one reason, the only reason that they did NFS vVols, a couple of them was for that cloning experience, because they clone a crap ton of VMs all the time and they have to be fast. And the way their automation works is they have to go across nodes from volumes to different volumes and things like that. So vVols allows you to have many volumes distributed across the cluster to leverage the full like I/O capacity of the cluster through a single volume, through a single data store. I meant to say, and it handles all that for you automatically through the software. So there are definitely some use cases for NFS and vVols, but to your point, the simplicity story and some of the other things really resonate much stronger in the block space.
I can't say I'm here on the show, but I will tell you that I was part of the councils for both VAAI and vVols when they were first coming up. And it was a bit of a sort of, think of it like a United Nations meeting. You've got members from every country coming together and saying what they think the right way to do it should be. And it's a very biased conversation, but you find middle ground somewhere in there. I will say that a lot of the copy offload stuff that is inherent to VAAI comes from our Flex clone. That's really what that comes down to, because if you think about the way Flex clone works in ONTAP, it's creating a 150 megabyte shell of a volume that you can then make writable and start writing to before any of the data comes over that those writes or accesses might be pulling other blocks over from. VAAI works very similarly.
Yep.
So a lot of the coffee offload stuff that we're doing in VAAI with vSphere is very much due to FlexClone. And I'll leave it there. One of these days, whenever I get around to writing a book about all of the inside baseball stories of my career, like I will, guys, I was a federal contractor. I worked with everything. So I looked at, there's so many stories like this that I want to tell one day when I can, whenever the statute of limitations runs out on clearances and all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, like, I think it's important to understand that VAI and vVols as technologies were basically put together as from a coalition of all of the different vendors.
Yeah.
There was representation from HP, from Dell, from EMC, from some of the auxiliary companies as well. They were all part of this coalition to bring this stuff together. This isn't a NetApp thing. So the point I'm trying to get at is the fact that they can't take advantage of it as well as we can is not a NetApp problem.
Yep.
I'll leave it at that.
There you
go. Last one here from Thomas. Just kind of your take on it. With Broadcom bundling more vSAN capacity, do you see any impact from that besides smaller, maybe SMB installations?
You know, it's an interesting question. I'll say one of the things, excuse me, one of the things they announced at Explore in Barcelona was introducing a new license called Enterprise Plus. We may have heard of that before.
How's that a new thing?
It's new. Yeah. And so, but along with that, so Enterprise Plus slots in at around the same price that VVF or vSphere Foundation used to. VVF got 10 to 12% price increase somewhere in that neighborhood, but then they got like a 150+% added vSAN capacity added onto that. The thing is, a friend of mine here at work, I always quote him because I love this line, but he says that vSAN is the most expensive free thing you'll ever buy. Because
said.
Yeah. If you're going to run, number one, the vSAN ESA ready nodes are, they tend to be fairly expensive server platforms, right? They're all in VME. But vSAN ESA, which is all that's being sold right now, your raw to effective plus dedupe compression savings, all that stuff ends up giving you about on its best day, like a 1.5 to 1 storage efficiency. We can guarantee 3 to 1 or 4 to 1, depending on the solution.
At worst.
But at worst. So yeah, right. If you factor in flex clone snapshots, all that kind of stuff, it's crazy the kind of stuff you can do.
The efficiencies you get when you consolidate your your VMware workload specifically. If you're putting all the VMs in 1 or 2 data stores, like, you're going to see upwards of 80 to 90% deduplication and stuff like it. In 2008, I saw 83%.
Yeah,
I will never forget that number because I was so blown away by it. After we P2V'd all those servers,
I got a better one.
I know better ones exist, but I was I'll never forget it because I was so just no way that's real. Like when the account reps first told me, oh, you can see like up to 80% deduplication. I was like, that's not possible. Wow. So yeah, you have a better one?
Yeah, so I met with a customer at Insight, and he had like 130%. No,
How do you
1,300%.
over
I know.
100% your efficiencies?
So the way this worked out was he had like rather extensive dev test environments, and they would
Okay.
create like 13 copies of every data store. And so let's say you have 100 copies. Now you've got, I don't know, whatever, how many multiply that out. That's how many copies of that same VM taking up that much space. So 13 copies of each data store. It might have been more. I don't remember the exact number, but by using flex, so you're already getting your compression savings in the aggregate, you're getting deduplication savings in the volume, and then you have 13 or so copies of each data store through
Thomas,
flex.
Here's what I'll say about vSAN. It's cumbersome. It's hard to recover from. And there's a reason in its, I think this is its 10-year anniversary this year. I think it was 2013, 2014, something like that. There's a reason it hasn't eclipsed even 10% market share.
Yep.
Even with the advantage of being native to arguably one of the biggest pieces of IT infrastructure ever in VMware, in vSphere. There's a reason it hasn't eclipsed that. The performance is not good. The reliability is not good. The resiliency is not good. It's convenient as hell, and it's free. But am I going to bet my company's data on it? Hell no. You can use it for test beds all you want. Sure.
Yeah.
Like a great little test environment thing that you don't have to deal with. Yeah, cool. But I mean, you still got to build and run the infrastructure to support it, even at a minimum.
Yeah, now the DVC and ESA is a lot faster than the OSA. I'll give them that, but
oh, sure.
Still, yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. So the ESA is a lot faster, and you know, interestingly, the raw to effective is actually lower on ESA than OSA, but they have better dedupe or compression. You know, so it ends up being you get on average maybe, you know, on a good day OSA you would get like a 1.3. Now ESA on a really good day you can get 1.5. But you know, the bigger point I would make is, and I know from a TCO perspective, like, and you can look at this from just a dollars and cents perspective, or from a sustainability and carbon footprint perspective, or, you know, look at it however you want. But at the end of the day, if you have to buy 10 to 20% more CPU cores when you're paying a per core license, now not only are you also getting 10 to 20% more server racks where you have to buy new top of rack switches, you have to extend your core network to support those other top of rack switches, every ESX server, right? So server CPU is probably the worst way to power storage you probably ever could, because your power saving, your power consumption, now you're consuming more racks, more switches, more cooling, and then the servers themselves not being super power efficient like a dedicated array is. Whether it's a NetApp array or somebody else's array, most of them are going to be far more efficient than you know what you're going to see on an HCI system. So
Thomas, this is your fault. You pulled our string. It's all your fault.
It's all Thomas's fault. But yeah, so anyway, from, you know, that little side quest there, I think there are just so many aspects where the cost, the overhead, the sustainability message, if, you know, if that's something that resonates with you, then all those are all factors to consider why. And then on top of that, you know, ONTAP is the most secure storage operating system on the world, and we've got the certifications to prove it. It's not just a boast. It's real. So you can't.
Listen, if you got old ESX hosts laying
otherwise
around and you want to stand up a demo environment or a test bed sandbox of some kind, and you just need something to be a data store, sure, cool.
Yeah.
I'm never ever gonna bet my company's stability on vSAN.
Mm-hmm.
Just not. And I may be biased in that respect, but no, thank you. And I'm sure there's plenty of cases out there where people have and they haven't had problems and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, no, not me. All right, so let's get back to the tools, because that's why the folks are here. We're probably going to go a little bit long today, guys. Just heads up. Had a little bit of a late start, and we got a lot to cover today. So understand if you guys got to go, but we'll be here for a little bit extra. And you can come back and check out the recording.
Yeah, be sure and come back and check out the recording if you can't hang out with us. But I'm excited to keep going. As we just, this was such a big year for us for doing, the VMware virtualization integrations with ONTAP tools. So if you remember back in the day, like when we started with VSC, it was a Windows app that you installed back when vCenter Server was a Windows app, right? You installed them on the same Windows server, and then SMVI you installed on the Windows server. And then going back to your question, it was the 7.0 release that was actually still VSC. So 7.0 was when it went from a Windows app to a Linux-based appliance. And then when we went to 9.x, I believe, is when it went to ONTAP Tools. And then we started aligning our release numbers with the ONTAP release numbers. But then we got to a point where we needed to make a generational change. And we also needed to maintain the legacy product for a little while longer while we were trying to reach feature parity. So we still have, right now we're probably 90% feature parity. The next next couple releases, I'd say by the end of next year, we should have full feature parity between the 10 generation and the 9 generation of ONTAP tools. Some of the things that we've done this year is the new architecture, which, it's always been able to manage multiple storage clusters, but now for the first time, we're also able to manage multiple vCenter servers off of the same ONTAP tools installation. People have been asking for that for years. Historically, it was like 1-to-1. You had to deploy ONTAP tools for each vCenter. Now, that's not the case. And even managing multiple vCenter servers off the same deployment, it's going to perform faster because we've modernized the application architecture. It's now a modern microservice, scalable architecture, and we're even able to scale out to a 3-node cluster of ONTAP tools. So now you could have highly available ONTAP tools, which is critical in a vVols environment, for example. Because you don't want to have to, even though it was never something we considered to be a single point of failure, in the sense that if the old ONTAP tools went down, your vVols didn't go down, but the command and control plane for the storage would kind of go down, and everything kind of goes, things like power on VMs wouldn't work because you couldn't control the storage.
Now things that were running would continue to run, but if you needed to do anything else, like, you weren't able to until you got that back up and running.
Yep. So now that you can deploy a highly available cluster of ONTAP tools, what was perceived as a single point of failure is now gone. And what I'm working on writing the best practices for it, so I'm sorry I'm a little late on that. But one of the things I'm going to be putting in there is create anti-affinity rules, so they never live on the same server and things. So there's some extra things you can do for an additional layer of protection. But this covers from our side that concern that a lot of people had about a single point of failure. Now, because it is designed for secure multi-tenancy, and in particular for Cloud Foundation, what you can do is you can onboard a cluster onto the ONTAP Tools Manager. And this is an interesting thing that people were, another thing people were asking for a long time, was being able to manage things like vVols with only SVM credentials. So what we can, and the reason why we had that limitation previously, that you had to have cluster scoped credentials to do vVols and certain other things, was because some of the APIs in ONTAP were only cluster scoped APIs. So how we get around that now is you still onboard the entire cluster into ONTAP Tools, the control plane. So it's got its own management interface that you can, it's very simple, easy to use. Just log into it, click storage, click add storage. That's it. But then what you do is you can delegate a single SVM to a tenant on a vCenter server, and through ONTAP's own tenant capacity management, which is an SVM quota, if you will, you can actually say, you could have a tenant that says, I want to use, 4 petabytes of storage. And you can say, okay, I'll create an SVM, put 4 petabyte capacity limit on it, and then I can give it to you, and you can completely self-manage right in your own vCenter and you don't have to do anything with the storage team or anything like that. It's super easy to do and super easy to self-manage. And because it extends all the storage information into the vCenter UI through portlets and things like that,
Yeah.
it makes any kind of troubleshooting a lot easier, because you can you can just see on a data store, if you're on a type of ONTAP system that has aggregates and volumes, you can see what aggregate, what volume, what one or namespace it is, or NFS export, what the export rules are, things like that. So it makes it just so much easier, faster and easier to manage storage in a vCenter environment.
I love that we've exposed up some of the stuff that we used to call it SMT, secure multi-tenancy.
Yeah.
And really, if you look at an SVM, if you use the command line, the command is still vServer. vServer comes from that secure multi-tenant architecture concepts and solutions that we did, I don't know, 2012, something like that. But the idea is that Coke and Pepsi can be in the same vCenter together, but not manage each other's storage, right? Just to give you a simple example. That's really what it comes down to. And now that we've exposed this up into vCenter through ONTAP Tools, fantastic. I think that's a really nice way to do that, because now you don't really have to physically separate the vCenters or even the hosts and virtual machines. You can delegate that access to the VM's storage and associated storage that way.
Yeah,
that's a great update.
So there's really there's kind of three tenets that ONTAP Tools is based on, or three core features, if you will, right? So it's the vCenter UI and REST API server, it's the VASA provider, and it's also the storage replication adapter if you want to integrate NetApp ONTAP SnapMirror, whether synchronous or asynchronous, with VMware, formerly known as Site Recovery Manager. Now it's called VMware Live Site Recovery, to take advantage of array-based replication. So that allows you to use their preferred first-party solution for disaster recovery orchestration, and leverage your, instead of using something like vSphere replication, where you're burning host side compute cycles, network resources, and all that kind of stuff to do the replication, you're getting much more replication scalability through SnapMirror. It's also more efficient as a transfer engine, and just overall, it's going to be a better option. And by integrating with SnapMirror, you're able to recover to a replicated snapshot. You could even use SnapCenter to drive those snapshots if you wanted to, which we can talk about in another webcast. We don't have time today. But what we've seen with the new microservice architecture that runs inside of the ONTAP Tools virtual machines is test failover and reprotect run about twice as fast as they used to, just by upgrading ONTAP Tools from 9 to 10. You're doubling the speed of those operations in fairly large scale environments. The actual RTO can be lowered by upgrading. So what we're seeing is an SRM failover runs about 32, 33, about a third faster. Just upgrading ONTAP Tools 9 to 10, your failovers run that much faster. So, and then, on the reprotect side of things, of course, we can execute it faster, but if there's a lot of data change between the two, right, we have to replicate the actual data. But as far as the work that's being done by SRM or VLSR and OTV, that stuff is just dramatically faster. And another thing that customers wanted for a long time, it used to be that you could kind of hack it together and make it work with an SRM shared site model. So what that basically means is you're fanning out from one vCenter server to multiple SRM servers, so you can scale out your disaster recovery. You still had to have like one ONTAP Tools per vCenter and one ONTAP Tools per SRM service. It's like, and you kind of had to hack it to make it work. You could get an FPVR and some instructions to do it, but it wasn't really what you wanted to do. Now that's just natively part of ONTAP Tools. You don't have to do anything special anymore to make it work. You just and configure the SRA and the SRM server, and it talks to ONTAP Tools and it manages it's
since
that
you brought
simple.
up SRM, I wanted to throw Khaled's question up here. for many customers want SRA for SRM without OTV. Can't we just get the SRA on SRM like the other vendors are doing? Why? So I guess the real question
Mhm.
here is, why do we require OTV in order to get the SRA?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple reasons for that. One is we can scale out and do a lot more operations and manage it in a orchestrated fashion. The other is we can kind of tie the experience. So we're looking at as a holistic solution that allows you to provision and lifecycle manage and monitor and report on your storage that you're protecting with SRM. So it's an entire solution that we're trying to work with, if that makes sense. And then also bringing in the other parts of our portfolio as well. And ONTAP Tools is free. It's included with ONTAP One. Snap Center is free, included with ONTAP One. So being able to integrate the provisioning and lifecycle management as well as backup protection, recovery, and then disaster recovery being provided by SRM is kind of how we're looking at it. By taking advantage of the best of ONTAP at every step of the way, you're going to be able to get much more out of your investment than if you had to just install bits and pieces here and there that weren't really connected and making sense together.
Yeah, I can't imagine having vSphere and NetApp storage and not using OTV, to be honest with you. Like, and it's so ingrained in me at this point from my history with VSC and
Oh
everything.
yeah.
Like, it's like who wants to eat a salad without any dressing on it?
Mhm.
Like, honestly, like that's how I think about it. Like, I just can't imagine a world where that is that people are actually asking for that. Do they think
Mhm.
it's extra overhead? Do they think that it's an extra VM appliance they have to run that they don't really want to
Yeah,
that's putting overhead? Like, that's what
I've
I
heard
would love to
some.
hear. It's like, so I feel like we could talk a whole
Yeah,
hour about that alone,
definitely.
the pluses and minuses of it. But I wanted to make sure you had time to get through everything that was new here when it
Yeah.
comes to uh, ONTAP tools.
So yeah, the big things that we've done this year with ONTAP Tools are the protection wizard for the vSphere Metro storage cluster. Um, of course, the scale and multi-tenancy and all that kind of stuff was table stakes for what we were bringing to market. But some of the other things we've done, we added support for NVMe over fabrics for both TCP and Fiber Channel for VMFS. Stay tuned for other stuff around that. The support for the new ASA platforms is what's currently in early access program. So if you have or will soon have an ASA, next gen ASA system like an A1K, A90, or A70, you can reach out to us and get involved in the early access program for ONTAP Tools 10.3. And you can kind of see how that's going to be like a different experience because there's quite a few differences. It's very simplified, and it's really funny that some people that I've heard the comment that they have to unlearn NetApp to learn how to do it with ASAR2 because it's so much simpler, and you might be used to the complexity of aggregates and volumes that now it's like,
Yeah.
what do you mean I don't need a volume for that one? That's crazy. Um, so yeah, you have to think of it. It's just a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we're doing, if you have experimented with 10.0, 10.1, 10.2, it was originally our original design partners for that were actually service providers, and they were intending to deploy these through automation. Think of something like Ansible or something like that, where you've got a playbook, you take some inputs, and then you spit out an OTB deployment, ONTAP Tools deployment. So there were a lot of, if you didn't do it that way, there were a lot of text, like 60 text boxes you had to type in to deploy it. So 10.3 has a much simpler deployment experience. So now it's like you just deploy a simple OVA, kind of like the old ONTAP Tools, even simpler in many ways than the old ONTAP Tools. And then you'd go into the manager and you'll tell it what services you want to run, and then you'll onboard your tenants or your vCenters, and then you'll onboard the storage that you want to manage. So it's not only was 10.1 and 10.2 a dramatic improvement over 9.x in its capabilities. 10.3 is going to bring a much simpler experience. So
Yeah, looking
I'm
forward to
really
trying it.
excited about that part. Yeah. I've got the early access bits if you want to try it.
Oh, that means I got to turn all this stuff back on. I might have to try it.
Maybe after the
give
podcast.
me twist my arm. Give me an excuse. Yes, please. Especially as we're winding down the year, going into the holidays and stuff. I'm always looking for side projects. Was that it for the what's new kind of coverage?
I kind of touched on what the key, 3 pillars of ONTAP tools are. That's kind of what the architecture looks like. And I just had one slide to touch on Snap Center. So for those who aren't super familiar with it, what Snap Center is all about is really a couple things, but primarily in the VMware universe, it takes ONTAP snapshot, SnapMirror, what we used to call Snap Vault as well as SnapMirror Cloud, all the goodness of that from ONTAP, and it brings it into the vCenter UI. So think about being able to right click on a VM and not just be able to do vCenter managed snapshots, but to be able to define things like snapshot backup policies and replication. And, we really like just a snapshot on the same controller that lives on isn't really a backup. But then you can integrate it with SnapMirror and you can replicate that to another storage array. And then if you have an S3 object store somewhere or a cloud store, you can then tier it to that as well. So you're really truly getting a 3-2-1 backup architecture that you're managing right in the vCenter UI, right next to ONTAP tools. And everything is context sensitive. And for example, you could right click on a VM, restore it from a local snapshot, a remote snapshot, a cloud snapshot. You can right click on a VM and go to attach disk, and it'll give you a list of all the snapshots. You can click on one. It'll clone the data store and find the disk and attach it back to the VM. So it builds all this automation around managing ONTAP snapshots and exposes it through like a really super simple, easy to use vCenter user experience.
Sounds
so
like
this
SMVI
year,
of old.
it is.
Isn't it weird how we're doing this all over again? Because Khalid just asked in the chat if we're gonna go back through a consolidation to bring all of these things back together into the OTV instead of having separate appliances running for stuff. And I'm like, we've been through this before about 15 years ago with VSC and SMVI, and we wrote a PowerShell toolkit for it, and then the PowerShell toolkit became what Snap Center used, and then Snap Center was built, and now Snap Center has a plugin for VMware, and we start the cycle all over again.
Yep.
So yeah, it is something that I will say, Chance, I'll let you weigh in on this. We obviously can't talk about futures and roadmap stuff, but it would make a lot of sense to consider at least the plugin. I'm not saying build all of Snap Center into OTV, but it would make sense to consider like being able to auto deploy or deploy via OTV the plugin for VMware. What are your thoughts around that?
No, I agree. I think back in the old days when we were kind of in that sweet spot where it was, VSC and SMVI were the same thing. So a lot of people didn't realize this, but at one point, VSC was actually a package of 5 different products, right? It was.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I do appreciate that, right? You probably wrote RCU.
Those product managers hated me.
So it was RCU, optimization and migration, SMVI. Did I say that already? No. And then VSC for the console. There was a 5th one. I forget what it was.
It was the VAI and plugin, host settings, VAI plugin, SMVI.
Yeah, host.
The cloning, the
host
cloning,
configuration.
The cloning tool that got folded in.
Yeah, so RCU was the cloning tool, and it was MNHC, monitoring and host configuration, was the 5th one. Yeah.
So all of those, to your point, all of those at one time were all separate. We slammed them all together into what you guys remember is probably like 2014, 2015 era VSC. And then things started kind of breaking out again because we've discovered new, more efficient ways to do things. And little science projects start happening around the country or company. Yeah. And then they all get productized and branded, and now we got to slam them all together again. So I can see a world where we get back to that.
I would say though, if you would like to see that or anything in particular, definitely, if you have a NetApp account team or a partner that you work with, reach out to them. Know. Yep. And they could submit what we call either an FPVR or an FEPVR, which is a a feature or a product variance request or a feature enhancement product variance request. And we actually, I know a lot of people think I put these into a black hole and nothing ever happens. Believe me, we review them. I had a review meeting 3 weeks ago with my PMs, and we absolutely do look at those. So and the more we get, the more likely something is to happen. So anything you'd like to see, make sure you're talking to us about it. Let us know what you want, and there's a good chance we'll do it.
Yeah.
Unless you're like the only guy, in which case maybe not. But that's usually not the case.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah.
Do you have any more slides here, or that we want to close things out with that, Chance?
Maybe we could talk about alternatives on another podcast. The other virtualization platforms.
Have to park that one.
yeah. But we do have a lot to talk about. I mean, VMware's dominated the market for so long that most of our integrations have been through that. But people would be surprised how much we do actually integrate with things like OpenShift virtualization or anything based on upstream KubeVirt, or even Hyper-V. We're doing a lot of stuff with Microsoft again.
Proxmox.
And Proxmox
is on the IMT now, folks, and I'm just pounding my chest on that one because I was the kid in the back of the room going, Proxmox! So shout out to all the home labbers and everybody out there, especially the Europeans that use a lot of Proxmox over there. Stay tuned because it's on the IMT now, and for both Fiber Channel, for all three, Fiber Channel, iSCSI, and NFS. And NVMe over TCP has been done by Creditive, our partner in Germany, for full implementation with Proxmox to a NetApp storage system using NVMe over TCP. It's out there. You can search for it. There's a full how-to stereo instructions blog post end to end. And we may have that guest on here soon, maybe first of the year. So
yeah, I would love to see that.
There are lots of alternatives to talk about. I feel like maybe we could do another episode first of the year and bring some friends, and maybe we just have a roundtable discussion about what everybody's seeing around the world from an adoption standpoint. Because I know there are a lot of people that have spent the year with their hair on fire screaming, oh my God, my bill went up 400x. But there is an honest question to ask is like, okay, cool. What are you going to do about it? Do you need help optimizing your environment? We got you. Do you need help moving to an alternative? We got you. Do you need help deciding whether or not to move to an alternative? Yeah, we got you. Like we are Switzerland when it comes to hypervisors. And I'll throw a bone out there. HP just announced that they're building their own KVM virtualization thing. I got to go check that out and see what the hell's up with that. So okay. So are we just in the Wild West of virtualization again? So yes, there's a bigger discussion to have here around alternatives, who does what, but just understand that whether you like OpenShift or Microsoft and you want to do it in Azure, Hyper-V, whether you want to do stuff with Proxmox or XCP-ng, they've brought XenServer back, guys, in case you didn't know.
Yeah,
it's an open source OG XenServer before Citrix. Like they brought back, and it's called XCP-ng. So if you haven't played with that in a while, it's out there on GitHub. You can just go literally download it and play with that. I'm going to be making some content on it probably over the next few months, along with Proxmox.
And Citrix is even I would say re-resurrected again the Citrix hypervisor, the branded version. So yeah.
Stop it. It was you guys' fault. You did the rug pull first. You're the ones that caused it to die in the first place. And now that people have tried to bring it back, you all of a sudden are interested in bringing back Citrix Zen again? Like, come on, guys.
Yep.
Knock it off. Let things live as they need to live. Oh, but I could go on tangents and rants for days on that kind of stuff. Bring back Rev, as far as I'm concerned. It was my favorite of the alternatives.
Yep. So
I know you want to do your OpenShift container thing, but can we have Rev back, please? It was great.
Yeah, there's an interesting point there to be made that KVM is, Hyper-V. There was kind of a myth last year, maybe it was earlier this year, that Microsoft had killed Hyper-V, and that wasn't true. They just killed a single SKU. It wasn't Hyper-V itself, right? So
it's always been there.
It's a core feature of Windows, right? And so if you want to use Hyper-V,
you got to go into Windows Server and check the box.
Yeah. So KVM's kind of the same way. So Rev, Red Hat may have killed the RHEL and the Rev, and what was their other name? it was Rev for a while, and then it was RHV for a while.
RHV, yeah.
Yeah. So they may have killed those SKUs, but you can still turn on KVM and Red Hat Enterprise Linux and have a supported KVM. You know, I mean, you don't have to do, but they really want you to do OpenShift. And to be honest with you, the value prop that NetApp has with OpenShift virtualization, it's a step above.
Agreed. And especially if you're trying to modernize workloads, taking advantage of containerization or Kubernetes or anything like that, like it's all part of the same process now. So they have it all sort of put together where we can help you migrate over there as a first step, but then look towards uplifting your workloads into more containerized things that will run in Kubernetes environments, and just really modernize it as a whole big thing. Not everybody's ready for that. Like it's 2024 going into 25, and we still have companies that 10 years into Kubernetes really kind of aren't ready for that yet. And that's okay. We did the exact same thing with VMware. Like VMware didn't really become what it was until 2012, 2014. Right? There were the early adopters of us in the first 5 or 6 years that were like, oh my God. And we were getting in fights with Oracle and Microsoft about support. And they were finger wagging at us, and because they didn't want to support all their stuff. But all of them now support everything. And it's because those of us that were on the front lines of it just absolutely drove them insane, calling them out for stuff in blog posts and Twitter and various podcasts and whatnot. But it will come around. Like there will be a time when Kubernetes is a little bit more mainstream. I dare say that now because 50,000 people go to KubeCon every year. If you're not looking into it as a technology, as a way to modernize your workloads and your applications, whether they're homegrown or you're using somebody else's, like that's something you need to be considering. So OpenShift is always an option. The cloud is always an option. Both oftentimes can be the right answer as well. It's just a matter of perspective, and it's subjective for every company. It's going to be different for every company out there. So we said we weren't going to talk about alternatives, but we're doing it anyway. Let's save that chance. Let's park that.
Yeah.
Let's bring back some friends and have a big round table first of the year. We'll bring in Jason and some various folks that definitely have some strong opinions on this stuff. So yeah, I'll commit. And by that time, I may have my Proxmox environment and maybe even XCP up and running back here. So I will have had some steps on it. We got to wrap it up, B.
Thanks, man.
Until next time, thank you so much, Chance. Thanks for always being around. Thanks for always answering the questions and bringing the good news to the people. So,
You bet.
All right. Thanks, man. It's good seeing you.
See you, everyone.
Well, there we have it, guys. I know we ran a little bit long today. There's really a lot to talk about when it comes to VMware and just virtualization in general. And I will commit to having another show first of the year once we get past the holidays and get some further updates on what's going on in the virtualization landscape. Again, if you wanted to go back and watch the episode from earlier this year with Rich from Two Guys Tech, we did a full sort of around the horn of all of the ones because he went out and tested every single option that was out there. So absolutely love the content that he made and love the episode that he was on with us. Go back and check that one out in case you missed it, because it was a really good conversation. I may actually like to have Rich to come back on and sort of do an update. So we'll see if that's possible. Maybe that's a sort of annual tradition that we start doing where we bring some of those guests back on and say, where are they now? How's things now? State of the Union sort of stuff. Anyway, we're off next week for the Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S., but we'll be back the following week. I haven't posted it yet, but we're going to have a good one on SnapMirror Active Sync with Mr. Jeff Steiner. So if you're still here, you're still watching, mark your calendars, because that's going to be a techie one right there. Guys, as always, make sure you join the Discord. Subscribe here to the YouTube channel. Follow us on all the social medias. You guys know how to do that stuff right now. As always, my name is Nick Howell. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Take care.